Hi, Larry.
Good evening, everyone. We'll call this regular meeting of City Council to order for Monday, October 20th, 2014. I'll ask Council to consider the adoption of the agenda. The recommendation is that the agenda for the regular Council meeting of October 20th, 2014 be adopted as circulated. Moved by Councillor Carlick Pearson, seconded by Councillor Ashley. Any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion's adopted. Next, for Council's consideration this evening are two sets of minutes. The first are the minutes of the special council meeting of October 6, 2014. The recommendation is they be adopted. Moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Ashley. Are there any errors or omissions? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. Those minutes are adopted. Next, for Council's consideration are the minutes of the regular council meeting of October 6, 2014. The recommendation is to adopt. Moved by Councillor Ashley, seconded by Councillor Garon. Are there any errors or omissions? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. Those minutes are also adopted. Next, we'll move on to petitions and delegations. This evening we have a presentation from Dr. Bruce Bidgood, and he is the chair. And he's also got Mr. Andrew Weber with him, who is the Manager of Development Services for the Regional District of Kitimat-Stikine. And Dr. Bidgood is the chair of the Northwest BC Resources Benefit Alliance, which makes up, I understand, a lot of the communities within the Kitimat-Stikine Regional District. Dr. Bidgood, if you'd make yourself comfortable up front here. The microphone is there. Please ensure it's on. It'll be a grayish green button to your eye. I'm also aware that you have a presentation this evening, which will be up on the screen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, public at large, administration.
Thank you. Just make sure that microphone's on. People at home will hear you.
We'd be reticent if we didn't also introduce our Chief Administrative Officer, Bob Marcellin, who's providing us support from the rear.
Yes, I see Mr. Marcellin in the background. I should tell you that I did get a phone call when you got to the municipal boundaries. It was the RCMP letting me know that Mr. Marcellin was here.
Okay, thank you very much. We weren't sure whether the call was when we're coming or leaving. We're not.
The call goes both ways, Dr. Bidgood.
Thank you.
But thank you, all three of you, for being here this evening. The community is interested in the alliance that you've formed with the other communities. Of course, Terrace, Kitimat, Stewart, the Hazeltons, and the gist of the developments, the reason for it, the text, and what you hope to achieve with the alliance, and whether or not the city of Prince Rupert and or the district of Port Ed would be interested in cooperating with you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We'll start off with Mr. Weber, please.
I'll try to rip through this, recognizing your time constraints, so I won't speak to every slide. I'll just try to highlight what we're trying to do here. We have kind of a Resource Benefits Alliance 101 presentation, and we've doctored it to try to focus on this, what's the background to this initiative, where are we in terms of the status of this project, and some principles of how it's organized and how it is going to proceed. So in our context, we're talking about revenue sharing as essentially sharing monies that are flowing to the provincial government currently from resource development that we would like to tap into in a whole different fiscal arrangement between or amongst governments. But of course, we shouldn't limit ourselves to just provincial government revenues. We could be looking at federal revenues as well. But primarily, this is what this initiative is around. It's not about taxing industry in a new way. It's about sharing revenue that is already or will flow to the province. So I'm sure it's of keen interest to this municipality, and it's been an issue for local government at various in various forms. And as you can see, there have been resolutions on it at UBCM. Fiscal Futures was a huge policy initiative at the 2013 UBCM, and that was really about sharing the whole wasn't regional revenue sharing. It was the whole process of how should local government be financed and new arrangements and new perhaps new sources of revenue to operate local government. And um, I'm not going to tell anybody here what they don't already know. We've had kind of a tsunami warning coming at us, and but this is all following a period of economic decline, population loss, local government struggling to provide services, and so heavily reliant on property tax and after that service fees. And it's like there has to be a better way. We're all in different ways struggling with this issue. So it's been a process, a couple of decades of very hard times in the Northwest, and now suddenly we're confronted with potentially unprecedented levels of development, and we have coping problems, and what's the legacy going to be from this next wave of industrial development? And this is essentially almost a restating of what I just said, and we're quoting Harrison Palmer here. This was a study that the City of Terrace commissioned and Regional District shared in the cost of, which was Roger Harris and Catherine Palmer were recruited to look at models for revenue sharing across the nation, and it was kind of a background document that we used. So I'll sort of pass it off here. I just want to, well, I've actually introduced the Harris Palmer report. It's on our website if people wish to read some of that background material. So an initiative started at the City of Terrace that is sort of being transferred over to Regional District, which has become the Resource Benefit Analysis Alliance. And then almost in parallel, the province is doing things and almost hints that they're open to perhaps revenue sharing in commitment to the rural dividend, and somewhat in the Northwest readiness, though I consider that kind of equipping local government to at least cope at a basic level to provide services in this period of rapid growth. Is that ripping through there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the rest of council. I mean, my message is an affective one, essentially. I mean, northern communities know the reality of boom and bust. I mean, whether you're involved in, whether it was fishing here, mining someplace else, logging someplace else, that feeling of, being here at a point in time when people were making a lot of money, and then it wanes, it goes to bust, boom goes to bust. And it's not a very satisfying situation because the City of Terrace has gone through a period of, a couple of decades of bust. And I'll be honest with you and offer a bit of confession. This was a bit self-interested on Terrace's part. Here you are in Terrace, you cross roads and you see development in every direction around you, but none of it's going to come to your community in particular because it's all outside your assessment area. And the reality for people in the north is as well is I think a growing dissatisfaction with the fact that we generate 70% of the revenue for the provincial government, yet receive 2% back. So I think that people who live in the north intrinsically recognize that there's a necessity for doing something differently in the next boom and bust cycle. And guess what? That's LNG. It's LNG and the associated industries that are going with it. It includes Rio Tinto Alcan modernization, includes mining. So there's a lot of things going on right now. And in the City of Terrace, I'm sure it's quite similar to you. We're experiencing unprecedented demands in terms of housing, planning. We were just mentioning before, as we're accustomed to having 15 development applications a year. We're now at 160 this year. I mean, it's just, something that we're not. So we feel there's a necessity for us to change the way that funds are allocated that are extracted from our regions, and that there should be some sort of mechanism for a living legacy as well. So essentially, that was the orientation for the City of Terrace in funding an original study. And this was matched by the Regional District of Kitimat-Stikine. The two combined to form a quasi committee under the Regional District of Kitimat-Stikine, and that had later on evolved into the Northwest Resource Benefit Alliance. The goals of the Alliance we'll talk about in just a moment, but the Alliance has expanded dramatically and beyond our imagination. Originally, we were thinking whether we would get all the elected governments within the Regional District of Kitimat-Stikine. Not only have we achieved that, but we now also represent all the electoral areas in the Bulkley and Chaco, as well as the regional district of Skeena Queen Charlotte, with the exception of Prince Rupert, because we are only here to present today. We've also met with the district of Kitimat to reinforce their particular acceptance. And we met with the district of Port Edward, who are also signatories to this particular perspective. So what are we looking for right now, Andrew? So we've had a series of meetings. We had a public announcement, which was really quite successful. We had penetration in the markets across Canada, including things like mining magazines, and so we were quite successful at that. And so that was the memorandum of understanding in July. We, as a consequence of that, we sent a letter to the Premier suggesting we'd like to meet with Dan Doyle, her Chief of Staff, and we got a response. We got a response almost immediately. So at the last UBCM, we had meetings with the Premier and Mr. Coleman and Minister Oakes as well to talk about revenue sharing. And so essentially what we did was make a request to start sort of administration to administration negotiations. And we're waiting to hear the scheduling from the Premier's office to come back to us. A couple of things that you should be aware of. Okay, let's see. Our membership now, I think we represent 25 different local elected governments. What we're doing is we're trying to build up groundswell support. It's one thing for us on councils to approve something, right? Because we're dealing all the time with sort of long-term vision and fiscal realities. But we want to move this particular movement out of the boardroom, out of the council chambers, and into the coffee shops. We want everybody to be walking around wearing revenue sharing buttons, because Northerners in general recognize the necessity of doing something differently when it comes to how resources are allocated between our different communities. We're also in the process of commissioning a fiscal study to figure out how much revenue is going to be generated from these industries. And we've taken a very broad brush perspective. The same way we would include any community that's been affected by this rapid economic development. So some people might say we're a little bit foolish because the Hazeltons is not going to bring a lot of economic development or industries and things to the equation, but they will experience the impacts. So each according to their kind is in, and each according to their kind will receive benefits. In addition, we've painted broadly our scope in terms of what industries should be included. Quite honestly, it doesn't matter to me, it doesn't matter to us in local government, where the demand from housing comes from, where the demand from the airport comes from. It doesn't matter to me whether it's coming from Rio Tinto Alcan, LNG, mining, or something of that nature. All I know is that we have to meet that demand. So in our request to the province is to include all industries in, and we'll work with them to see at the end, because some are more complicated than others to calculate. That's basically been our approach to date. We're doing fiscal analysis. We're also looking at coming up with an allocation formula, and that's really the brilliance of the whole scheme. Is I'm particularly enamored with the equation that's come up with in the Peace Regional District, where they allocate funds on the basis of population, industrial assessment, and some historical issues regarding infrastructure. So that's kind of an interesting sort of formula. We will work collectively to work towards an allocation formula for our area. We're also doing further outreach. We're not stopped at just the communities we've touched to date. We're also going to make overtures to First Nations communities as well, who are obviously feeling the impacts of this rapid economic development as well. Now, when we approach First Nations communities, I don't imagine they're going to sit there and say, oh, yeah, you know what? We're going to join the alliance and give up our individual right to negotiate with the senior levels of government. That's probably not going to happen. But we could come up with some sort of association which would include a memorandum of understanding for the flow of communication between the two groups, so we know what they're talking about when they're negotiating with their province, and they know what we're talking about. The one thing that I want to make very clear is we're trying to do very differently. When we first raised this subject, and I first raised this subject at NCLGA and groups like that, you got a very funny reaction out of the Northeast. It was kind of like, don't talk about it. I mean, what do you mean don't talk about it? They didn't even want me to use the words fair share. Right? So I used to play around with different sort of phrases and say, why don't you want to talk about it? And then the reality struck me. The province had put the fear of God, I think, to some degree, into those communities, saying this is a one-time deal and other people better not ask for it or you won't get yours, right? So they were very afraid of tipping over the apple cart or ruining things for themselves by engaging other communities in the discussion of revenue sharing. I'm pleased to say that that has not been the case. They have renewed their agreement the last time, and they're feeling fairly comfortable in that, and have been big proponents of us organizing ourselves in the Northwest. They see the benefits. Dawson Creek, and somebody said to me, I said, oh, I guess it was the mayor of Fort St. John said, well, we really haven't benefited that much. But when you go to Fort St. John and you see the, the community centers, or you go to Dawson Creek and you see the Encana Center and things of that nature, you say, well, we'd love to not benefit the same way that you have. So we have kind of formed an alliance. We have discussions between the two groups of people, and we're trying to learn a substantial amount from what they did in the Peace Regional District as well.
I believe, Doctor, that Dawson Creek receives somewhere between $9 million and $11 million a year, maybe even higher, up towards 15 million as a result of the fair share.
And that's exactly correct. And the fact of the matter is, I think that Terrace could benefit from 12 million a year. I'm quite confident that Rupert could as well. And the situation is quite similar when you stop and think about it. In Dawson Creek, they had a community with oil and gas all the way around it, but none within Dawson Creek. But all the people who were working in those industries were coming into Dawson Creek for services. Well, that's how we felt in Terrace. Somehow how you feel in Rupert as well, right? I'm guessing there may be a chance, but I mean, for LNG to be located right within the boundaries of Prince Rupert, well, it's hard to say. But the reality is a very similar one in terms of the fact that we need to be compensated for the fact that we are the providers of service and the providers of infrastructure, which industry requires in order to pursue this rapid economic development. And I want to move away from a charitable. We don't just deserve it as charity. I like to think of it as we are co-investors along with the province. I mean, we don't have as much money, but we are willing to invest our infrastructure, our services, our social license, and our cooperation. Those are our investments to go along with the province's investments at the same time, and industry's investments. So we have no problem then saying we should receive dividends in accordance with our investment. So we're not looking at conditional grants or unconditional grants. How we see this is the same way as it works in the Peace Regional District, is a certain amount of money is allocated to our community, and we decide how it's allocated within each of the areas. If you can go to the next slide. I just bring this up. I'm enamored with the Peace Regional District model. Our consultants don't want me to talk about it, but I can't help but think that they have the same sort of situation in their, what was it, 94% of the industry in their area stuff was outside municipal boundaries. And guess what? If you're thinking you can expand your municipal boundaries in order to assume an LNG plant or things, I'm pretty sure the province isn't going to allow that. I think Rich Coleman's already been unequivocally clear. So the Chetwynd solution of expanding your boundaries to include a mine is probably not going to work here. So it has to be a negotiated deal. But they were in the exact same situation we were in. Next one, please. The Peace Regional District, I think, is a very good one for us. Some people don't like us using it because it's a grant in lieu of taxes as opposed to revenues. There's lots of different ways you can organize yourself. You can ask for a percentage of the royalties from industry. You can ask for a certain amount from income tax. You can ask for a certain amount from sales tax. These are all different kinds of models. There are models in the Peace Regional District. In the Northern Rockies, I'm not enamored with the one in the Northern Rockies because they capped how much it can go to at $200 million. Mind you, $200 million sounds pretty good to me, but it's in principle, your dividend shouldn't be capped at any level as long as you continue to make profit. And the one that our consultant really is looking to us to emulate is the Columbia Basin Trust, which has unlimited amounts of money that can be attained through the Columbia Basin Trust. In addition, it can be allocated in any way, shape, or form. Next slide, please. There's no magic formula to this. I mean, we're lucky. I mean, we came to revenue sharing at a very opportune point in time. I mean, forget about the LNG industry and all that sort of thing as well. But I mean, we approached a political party, which I don't think thought they were going to get elected. And they said, sure, we're in for revenue sharing. And then they were elected and in power. So politically, we didn't go through the hard sell that other communities have had to do in order to get the province to embrace revenue sharing for our area. It doesn't circumvent, however, the necessity for each community to spend time talking to their citizens about what is revenue sharing and why it's important for our local community. We need to build consensus amongst local governments. I can never remember another time when local governments have come together so well and coalesced in a coherent group as they are doing now. I mean, now, as Andrew said, we are involving communities all the way from Haida Gwaii over to Vanderhoof and Stewart to Kitimat, right? That's a tremendous area. Some of the things we have to do is, yeah, I don't know about Prince Rupert, but in Terrace we have a $45 million, ready? $45 million infrastructure deficit. That means undone roads, sewer, water treatment. This is not frills like a community center or a new rink or anything like this. Is just undone projects, right? So we need to assess for the province how much undone projects we have and how much more infrastructure we're going to need to support this sort of economic expansion. Sandy Overpass is a classic example. It was never intended for the level of truck traffic it's going to be getting as a consequence of LNG. And I mean, the magnitude is really quite astounding. I mean, somebody used as an example, Site C Dam. When it goes forward and things like that, there will be a truck full of gravel going through Chetwynd. I think it's every 3 minutes around the clock. We can expect to see some substantial changes in our traffic flows and things as well as LNG comes online. We're in the process of negotiating with the province. I tried to get the Premier to wear a button. Apparently she doesn't button easily. But we have had a number of the ministers recognize the necessity of this particular revenue sharing arrangement, and we're in a point in time now of figuring out to whom we're going to speak. We have to figure out the revenue projections. How much money are we talking about? How much money will the LNG industry make? I mean, the fact of the matter is it depends on how many final decisions we have. Right, and we have to do a calculation of that. We have to sign an agreement with the province and then implement. How we've organized ourselves. I'm just going to say, you see this? It's a pretty picture. This is what they did in the Fair Share Agreement. This is what they did in the Peace Regional District. But the common elements that seem to be is there's a broad group, and then there's a smaller group that runs the revenue sharing, and finally an advisory group. So we're thinking that the overarching or plenary group that we will have is every elected official from every community that signs on to the Resource Benefit Alliance Memorandum of Understanding. So that could be hundreds. So we're talking essentially organizing conferences or symposiums at different points in time to get people's opinion, to have the broadest level of input. The work done on a day-to-day basis, including hiring of staff and supervising of staff and developing policies, would be done by a standing committee. It is a standing committee now which is discrete from the Regional District of Kitimat-Stikine Board. It's independent. However, monies can be flowed through the Regional District on behalf of the group itself.
Who do the members represent on that standing committee?
On the standing committee, right now, it is the Regional District of Kitimat-Stikine. Very good point. We're also having the Memorandum of Understanding being modified to allow for new members to participate in the standing committee. And that was brought up by Port Edward, and the point is well taken. In addition to the dispute resolution must include some input from new members as well.
Right. Let me interrupt you, Doctor. I see Councillor Ashley had a question.
Just a question with regarding to this, because I can understand how this would be the starting point, because obviously the Regional District of Kitimat-Stikine sort of started the flow of this idea. But I'm guessing that there is room for the governance structure to be changed if people come on board and then we look at how everybody would have the say. Is that correct?
Exactly what we've done. I don't know whether we mentioned it.
You'll have to put your mic on again.
I don't know whether we mentioned it at great length before, but one of the things, you see Jurassic Park, the old guy who says we spared no expense. That's what we've kind of tried to do with this particular one. I think we've hired the best law firm possible in Lidstone and Associates, who are the people who are negotiating on our behalf with the province and also organizing some of our public relations activities. We're also looking at getting some of the finest economists to do some of the financial projections as well. But it was brought up to Lidstone right off the bat that when Port Edward joined that there needs to be a provision. There already was a provision to add new people into the equation, but to have them as part of the governance structure. So that's being rewritten now, and we thank you for that input. I mean, we really didn't think at first it would take on as well as it has. So that's an important one. That important principle is that all the participants should be represented. But in addition to is we're going to be asking some of the regional districts and groups to contribute. The City of Terrace put up $75,000 right off the bat. So did the Regional District of Kitimat-Stikine. But there's a principle that we've adopted as well, which is first in, first out. So if we put in $100,000 and we get allocated $20 million from the province, the first $100,000 goes back to the City of Terrace. right? The first 100,000 goes back to the regional district of Kitimat-Stikine. That's only fair. And then the remainder is allocated amongst the different parties.
Right.
Next slide, please. Again, we're talking about, it's not just about LNG. We're hoping for a broader representation of industries. The province is probably going to push back on that and try to keep it confined to LNG because it's the most manageable. Again, the memorandum of understanding allows for additional members. This is an important principle, is we heard grumblings from Minister Coleman saying that perhaps they would put limits on local government's ability to be able to levy taxes against industry, which Prince Rupert knows quite well with the container port, right, and those kinds of agreements, and which of course drove the mayor of Kitimat to distraction, to which point we said, well, you know, the alliance is opposed to the province affecting local government's autonomy when it comes to taxing assessment. This is going outside that. We're not going to play a trade-off game. We trade one for the other. The other one is we're not going to trade off, you know, you receive this much in hospital funding, so you should get this much less in revenue sharing. This is for additional expenditures beyond our assessment, our property taxation, and beyond the services we currently receive. So every community, one of the principles is every community must be better off as a consequence of this agreement than it was previously. It's not a break-even net scenario. The imposed caps is something that concerns me. The province has developed an increasing tendency to say, oh yeah, we'll negotiate revenue sharing agreements, but we'll cap them. Well, as long as you're willing to cap the expenses that we incur, we can talk. But in my mind, as long as we're continuing to invest as we are, we should be having access to the dividends the same way. This is not to say, this will not affect industry at all. We're not asking for a single dime from industry. That's why they embrace the concept. Many members of, you know, TransCanada and LNG Canada, they love wearing these pins, right? Because they're going to pay their taxes into the province. And in fact, if the province agrees to keep some of it dedicated to the local community, that helps them attain social license at a local level. The goal is to have some degree of equalization. Communities which are not going to be affected dramatically in terms of, you know, being able to bring new industry to the table still have large levels of infrastructure gaps. Some of the places in the revenue sharing from the Peace Regional District, it was the electoral areas that benefited right off the bat because they had not had any industrial growth in such a long time. And lastly, as I said, our communities have to be better off as a consequence of this development. Again, this as politicians, we become sort of Pavlovian dog experiments. We become conditioned every time the province comes around with a meaty bone for us to jump up and down. And I don't mean that to be derogatory. We're conditioned, however, to...
It doesn't sound derogatory at all.
Okay. But we're conditioned anytime there's money available to sit there and say, can I have it? Can I have it? And it was brought home to me was I missed a meeting at Terrace City Council, and one of the ministers, I think it was Bill Bennett, was there. And he started talking about, you know, you need to organize yourselves for what you need and things like that. And we had councillors jumping up and saying, we need a new pool, we need a museum, we need a new road, we need this, that, we need a pony, we need a, you know what I mean? And at some point in time, no. What we need, we want to give you a wish list. What we need is our cut. And we will decide after the fact how we allocate that. That's a major difference. But like I said, as a consequence of not having funds for a long period of time, it's a sort of a knee-jerk reaction to sit there and say, can we have this? Can we have that? I don't like the word dividend. The word dividend, which the Premier used immediately, she said she called it the rural dividend, is dangerous in my mind. A dividend is something that you get only after a company becomes profitable. We're looking for some money up front because we're experiencing the demands now.
Paying it forward.
Investment, ground floor investment, right? We're letting the province in on the alliance. We're letting you in on the ground floor. We're investing up front. We expect the province to invest up front as well. And most of the ministers and the Premier have acknowledged that. We're still working on Minister Coleman. The other one is the LNG revenues. I'm just trying to think of what that point was, Andrew. Negotiating away LNG revenue. Oh, the other one, in the negotiations of the final agreement with the industries, we're hoping that they're not going to, they have the 1.5, 7. We want to have some sort of input or at least some sort of parameters about that. We don't want them trading away all the monies, so it's saying that they'll take such a low rate of tax at the beginning because we need money in the beginning. So the fact of the matter is that, sorry?
If you could, Mr. Dr. Bidgood, perhaps explain, because we have people at home watching on TV who aren't familiar with
And
the
I'm willing to
terminologies.
admit my not knowing what 1.5, 7 means. If you wouldn't mind explaining
Please
that,
go ahead. This is the second time I've heard this, but please go ahead.
Thank you. The province in its early negotiations with the LNG industry was saying when they're trying to come up with a rate of taxation, when they're oscillating at the beginning. I mean, some countries charge an extraordinary amount, but I mean, I think our province was talking somewhere less than 10% overall. So they came up with a formula that they thought would be attractive to the LNG industry, thereby helping them, in order for us to be competitive in getting them. They said, what would you think if we only charged you 1.5% tax while you're repaying your capital investments, and then we switched to 7? Well, I don't know about you, but if my accountant's worth a darn, they're going to sit there and say, never pay that money back. Keep going at the 1.5% rate forever. Only pay back an extra. So, I mean, there's some limitations to that. I understand where they're coming from. But I guess my cautionary note there is to the province, please don't trade away the farm. Because our ability to be able to respond to LNG industry and other industries is contingent upon having some upfront monies. So if you go to 0% and 7%, we're out of luck.
The bargaining ability for local governments does rest with the province, though.
It does, yes.
Councillor Garon.
Just for clarification, that's LG is local government, or is that supposed to be LNG?
Local government. Yeah. Thank you. I don't believe in acronyms. TTC. Good point. And the other one, cap, that actually means cap here. On assessment taxation. Another one is the government has gotten into the practice of trying to put caps on revenue sharing agreements. So like the Northern Rockies one is capped at 200 million. Well, if the revenues continue to rise and rise and rise, I mean, the Premier suggested at one point in time the Prosperity Fund could be $100 billion. And if we're asking for, let's just say 3%, that's $3 billion. A $200 million cap really isn't going to cut it. So our point here is that we're going to resist any attempt to put a cap on assessment taxation, right? Either the local government's ability to tax assessment within their area, or an overall cap in terms of the revenues derived from LNG and other industries.
Dr. Bidgood, if I could, Councillor Cunningham had a question.
Thank you.
Okay, this is future caps, not existing caps. Are you going to try and resist existing caps? Like in the city of Prince Rupert,
Yes, sir.
the province has a cap on the port right now, and they've lowered it once already. Now they're talking about putting a cap on LNG development too. So, it's as a city like us with no heavy industry anywhere else other than the waterfront, it's been quite a burden for our residents. And this is something that I find very interesting, a cap on assessment.
Thank you. Through the mayor to you, Councillor, your point's really well taken. We had contemplated on future caps, but your point's well taken. I mean, if the same logic were applied to existing relationships, why should there be caps on municipalities' ability to tax currently? It would be inconsistent with the position we've adopted, but that would be something we'd have to examine in sort of a policy position.
Councillor
Well,
Cunningham.
if we were to join the alliance, then would that be a consideration taken that you would look at past caps as well as future caps?
That is another good question. All I can say is, I mean, I can speak as the chair as much as your mayor can speak. I could certainly commit to raising the topic, to having that discussion, right? But I mean, the point's very well taken. I mean, if you're not going to accept a cap on LNG, if you're not going to accept a cap on mining and things like that, why do you accept it for, I'm going to guess container ports? It seems inconsistent.
Good guess.
I saw where you were going with that. But your point's well taken. You can see how the government is increasingly, I mean, I'm not trying to demonize the government. I look at them as my co-investors, right? But you can see how they're wanting to limit their liability. right? And by picking selected industries and putting caps on them, it endangers us all. It endangers the principle of the fact that we are co-investigators and should get our proportional share. Next one. Money. You know, money's really important because I don't know about you, but our community has been starved for money for a long period of time. And as I said, we have all sorts of issues which we have not been able to deal with. Our infrastructure deficit is a huge one. Other one, there's going to be a lot of new people that weren't there before. This is going to represent challenges, but it's also going to represent opportunities for our communities as well. To me, the next 2 points are really important. I look at this this is not just an opportunity as a cash grab. This is an opportunity for our communities in the Northwest to have some role in changing the boom-bust cycle of our economies. If we can be given access to a secure and consistent flow of revenues, we can do things such as put money away for future infrastructure projects. Because you know what? If we don't have anything more than our last paycheck in our hand as the LNG truck pulls out, then shame on us. We've seen it before, we know better. This time around, when there is lots of hay to be had or during the sunshine and things like that, we need to take that money and carefully invest it in capital replacement projects, in a capital replacement fund so we can do infrastructure during those down times. And we can change a little bit to take maybe the peaks and the troughs a little bit off of that boom and bust reality. Now, I mean, I'll be honest with you. When we first started this, I mean, Terrace was in a very vulnerable position. I mean, watching industry be surrounding you all around, I mean, one of the few avenues I could see that we could get some revenues, quite honestly, was by looking at a resource benefit alliance or some sort of revenue sharing agreement. Right? We would sell things to people, but none of the industry is going to be located in Terrace. But you know what? Things have changed for Terrace now. And we've sold our industrial park, you know, over 1,000 acres to a Chinese company that's looking at putting in somewhere in the range of 17 factories. And could be up to 5,000 jobs. So guess what? Suddenly Terrace is putting money on the table too. We will have our version of Rio Tinto Alcan, and the revenues derived to the province from that will be shared amongst the other communities as well. That's one of the important things to think about in terms of revenue sharing agreement. You could be rich one day, but you know things change. And the examples of this is I'm thinking when the revenue sharing agreement was negotiated in the Peace, Taylor had all the revenues in the world because all the industry was located right there. So they received no money out of the revenue sharing agreement or the Peace, the fair share agreement originally. Guess what? With the economic downturn in their area, they're now getting benefits. Tumbler Ridge is another example. They had so many coal mines and things in that area that were doing very well, so they were not making a huge amount of money out of the revenue sharing agreement. Guess what? Coal mines closed. And now they will have a higher proportion of the overall revenue sharing will go to them. So this is not just for your current prosperity or your current lack of resources. This is also for over time, and it will change. Like I said, I think that that's the important message. What did we learn from the past? What did Rupert learn from fishing? And what did Terrace learn from lumber? We need to keep a certain proportion of the resources, the money from these resources in our area. If we believe in the common good that we'll put it into a general pool and we'll get it back later on, it hasn't proved to be the reality to date. So that's the rationale and why we're here today, because we think Rupert could benefit just as substantially as the city of Terrace is going to benefit from this particular association. This is my Joanne Monahan metaphor. When we first brought up the whole idea of revenue sharing, her response was, I think, not over my dead body or something like that. But I mean, she saw it as a direct threat to the revenues from the District of Kitimat, which stands to have a lot of this particular proportion. So in explaining it to her particular district and to the mayor, I said, you know, we don't want any part of your cake. That's your assessment. That's yours. That's yours by your location in your proximity to this industry. But what we're talking about is the icing. The benefits derived from that additional new monies. It's not going to affect you. We're wanting a share of that. And it was a metaphor that seems to stick. I think a cake is a very attractive metaphor as it is. Lastly, Again, the Peace Regional District model, I mean, like I said, I emulate, I steam that in a lot of different ways. You know what I didn't like? Is I didn't like it was done all behind closed doors. And the other one, the Northern Rockies one as well, it just got announced. And I understood there was an agreement just announced from Kitkatla, a revenue sharing agreement. It seems to me that a lot of these negotiations are with the province and they're behind the scenes. We want to do something differently here. First of all, we want to make it open to everybody who's affected. And second of all, we want to be remarkably transparent.
Some of these revenue sharing agreements with the communities surrounding Prince Rupert are between the individual communities
Understood.
and industry partners.
Yeah, understood. But for us, I mean, like I said, the fair share agreement just exploded onto the scene. I mean, there were negotiations going on, but it really wasn't a matter of public discussion and debate. We don't want that. That's why the first thing that we did was once we formed an organization, we went out to talk to other people. And in addition to that, we're not only talking to people in the Northwest, as we've had discussions with the mayor's group in the Northeast. Right? Wouldn't it be, I'm sorry, I have delusions of grandeur, but wouldn't it be wonderful at some point in time to have an alliance that traversed the entire northern section of the province? You know, from the top to the bottom of the LNG pipeline, where we negotiate collectively. It really would have a dramatic impact in terms of negotiating with the province. We're wanting to have partners from different communities. We want to have a common message when we're talking to the government. And the other one is we're interested to see whether, do you see yourself reflected in this, or what role does the city of Prince Rupert see in terms of revenue sharing? Because we believe that by negotiating collectively, we'll be able to accomplish things that we were never able to accomplish negotiating individually with the province. So, Mr. Mayor, I think that's pretty much it for our presentation.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We'll go to questions from council. It should be understood that when you use the Peace River area as an example, that there's an anomaly there in that in a lot of regional districts, the larger communities are where the wealth is.
Mm-hmm.
Those larger communities within the regional district. Up in the Peace River area, of course, with the oil and gas activity, some of those rural areas are indeed wealthier than the communities.
That's absolutely true.
Right. Yeah. Questions from members of council? Councillor Ashley.
Thank you for your presentation. I mean, I think there's lots of things that are interesting about doing this, and I think it always pays to work with communities and work together. You're stronger together. There are some things that I have questions about, though. One of them has to do with, I kind of already asked a little bit about the governance, but it sounds like that is something that can be negotiated as the alliance forms. But another thing that was, I guess, something that's in my head is in your discussions so far between the various communities that have kind of signed on, has there been any discussions about how you propose to deal with allocations? For example, if, let's say, I'm going to use the example of Petronas here because it's outside of Prince Rupert's municipal boundaries. However, we are essentially the service center. Obviously, Port Ed will offer what they can, but we have, that. Has there been any talk about how that allocation and how fairness would come about in that type of a situation?
Mr. Mayor, through you to the councillor, your point's well taken. I mean, we haven't really, there are economists and there are people who are experts in terms of like intergovernmental relations and allocation specialists who will look at this. It seems to me that, and I don't want to overstep a decision made, but the regional districts would be a perfect vehicle in my mind in terms of the dissemination strategy, because they're already in the business of allocating on the basis of service. And if people should feel that that's not a fair system, I've had preliminary discussions with NDI. NDI would be more than willing to take the government's share and to allocate on the basis of a prearranged formula. So we have a distribution venue, whether it be the regional districts or NDI, either one of them could serve. But the principles are going to be ones that we're going to have to negotiate collectively in terms of how much goes to each regional district. And it's probably going to, in my mind, be a function of the two things that are in the fair share agreement. It's going to be one, population, and two, industrial assessment. Industrial assessment isn't a beautiful indicator, but it is an indicator of one, roughly the activity in your area that you should be able to tax, but the other one is it should be an indicator of demand. The assumption being if there's a lot of industrial development in your area, there's going to be a lot of demand in your local communities. So I'm thinking some sort of approximation of both of those. Yeah.
Councillor Cunningham.
Okay, I thank you for your presentation too. It's very enlightening. First of all, the community sharing. It's not going to be within our municipal boundaries. Anything within our own municipal boundaries stays within that. Okay, now what Councillor Astley was bringing up about Piranhas, it is not only in the district of Port Ed, but it's also on port.
Yeah.
Again, we get to that. And if LNG is capped, now here we are, the service center, providing everything, not just roads and sewer and solid waste and that, but recreational facilities and everything. And then you have an industry that's capped. It shows a lot of industrial assessment in the area, but again, that industrial assessment goes down every year as we see the different companies writing their investment down. And so we'll have a lot of activity, a lot of industrial assessment, but we're not going to be benefiting from it very much. So that indication you're talking about will be working against us in a way, will it not?
I like him. It's a really good question. And the fact of the matter is when you look at this, I'm just trying to think it's election season. How honest can I really be?
Be totally honest.
You might want to refer to the province's taxation scheme on the LNG industry, for which we're all waiting.
Well, I'll say to you this. I mean, when I originally conceptualized this, I was being a bit selfish. And you're looking at places like the Hazeltons, you're looking at Alice Maitland's community, you're thinking, why would we include them? Right? You're sitting there, they're not going to bring industry to the table. They're not going to bring revenues to the table. And that's when we had that sort of revelation. It isn't how much money you bring to the table, it's how much impact you've experienced. And I'll explain why I'm saying that in just a moment. So that was a huge revelation in my mind, sitting there going, it's not how much you can profit from other people's assessment. It's about like actively working together to address the demands that are occurring as a consequence of this huge economic expansion. Because in my mind, immediately, thoughts of Prince Rupert came forward. And I thought to myself, who needs it? I mean, Prince Rupert is a complicated area for a revenue sharing agreement, right? The container port with its capped agreements and things of that nature. But again, by abstraction, the fact that this is going to be a complicated area to examine in terms of revenue sharing does not preclude the inclusion criteria, which is there is no doubt that Prince Rupert is going to be dramatically affected by this expansion. So our commitment is to try to work with you to come up with something that works for you. Because the overarching principle isn't how much money we can get from you. It's can you demonstrate need as a consequence of economic expansion? And by that criteria, you should be included and your unique situation should be part of the calculation. So we have much better minds than I, economists who are going to be working on this round the clock to figure out how do you deal with this? And they have a lot of experience in negotiating revenue sharing agreements with First Nations and other organizations as well. So it is possible. It's just Prince Rupert was going to be a remarkably complicated one.
Thank you. Councillor Cunningham again, and then Councillor Garon.
Well, as a local government, we have to look after all our citizens, no matter at what level of income they're at. And so I also think, and I like the idea of this, but we also have to look after the communities that have not communities. And that is something in an alliance like this that's very important. And not only like this alliance, I really like the idea, and I love your dream of grandeur that one day we have the whole North, because you don't get too many stumpage fees out of Stanley Park or royalties mining in Burrard Inlet, but we've continually seen this steady drain of our money building bridges and infrastructure in the south while our roads fall apart. When we went to UBCM, they're repaving the highway up to Whistler that was just built how many years ago at what cost, and they're already repairing that road and our roads are falling apart. But anyway.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just
please go ahead.
And a brief response. And this is why this is going to work. The sentiment that you just expressed unites us all. That sense of we have not been fairly treated in terms of getting our fair share of the huge amounts of revenues derived from our areas. That's what unites all the people in northern BC, northwestern BC now, but I believe northern BC in general. And that's what will make this work is if people are pragmatically committed to the whole principle about no, we're not going to have another invasion of people who come in and put all sorts of demands on our community, take all the money and leave afterwards. Our communities need to get their fair share, and our communities need to have a lasting legacy. And I believe that that is such an overarching and strong feeling that it's going to be more than sufficient to redress these sort of differences that separate our communities in terms of assessment and caps and things.
Thank you. Councillor Garon and then Councillor Ashley.
Thank you for your presentation. I guess the one main thing is when dealing with the provincial government, united we stand, divided we fall, and I think it's best if, if we can all cohesively work as a group. However, there's pros and cons, and each region is completely different from the other, and this is such a complicated, complex piece of economy to work with, and I, it's just something that I think each council really has to look at carefully and decide what's good and what's bad, what will work. If we're going to include First Nations as well as Haida Gwaii, each region is so different from another that I I just see it being a very complicated process, and if it could be simplified somehow, which I don't see how that could happen. I'm not an expert in this, but I think the stronger voice we have, the better. So I think there's a lot of questions that need to be asked and answers that need to be found. So I thank you for your presentation. And
I could see how the province of British Columbia would want one entity to deal with as opposed to a variety. Councillor Ashley, Councillor Thorkelson, then Councillor Kinney.
I wanted to just bring one more thing up. I did ask earlier about that one governance piece, and I guess the reason, and I've seen part of the memorandum of understanding that different groups have looked at, and I know that that's something that can be reworked. But I bring it up as a fairly big concern. Has you mentioned that Terrace is facing a $45 million deficit. Well, the fact is that Prince Rupert's facing a $250 million deficit right now.
It's actually a little larger.
Yeah, so it's quite large, and so I mean we share that concern of trying to meet those needs, and so I'm sure you can understand that as we look at this and we see the benefits of working together, and obviously we want to try and maximize the potential for everybody to do this. We obviously have to protect our interest in terms of being while we're doing that, and so I guess what I'm wondering is as an agreement, if we're working together is being formed. One of the things I would be very concerned about is the power for people to agree or disagree with certain parts. Could you agree to be, for example, part of the alliance working together, but maybe you don't agree to certain parts of it because that part doesn't work for you? And so I'm not sure what what room there is for negotiation on those types of things or how much talk has been made about that. So I don't want to give the wrong impression. And obviously this is a decision I think that whoever gets elected is going to have to make. But again, I think that is going to be a concern because you have to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And I realize that working together could be part of taking care of yourself, but we also just need to be careful. So I don't know if that's a quite clear question, but.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the councillors. One, I love the complexity of the situation. Who better to solve it than us? I mean, the exact diversity that we have is going to be our strength in how we negotiate this particular point. And I mean, I'm a statistician. I create models, mathematical models, and I mean, it spins my head thinking about the different permutations. But if we have fundamental agreement on some principles, and I'm thinking that probably the default position is going to be the regional districts allocated on some sort of formula, and then they are the mechanism. So I mean, there are strategies that we can use to simplify, but I don't think we should allow the complexity to prevent us from moving forward, because at some point in time, somebody invented this whole construct as well. And the whole notion of sharing based upon perceived impact and perceived revenues would have been construed as remarkably complex as well. So I think what we do is we get the very best people to work on this and to come up with a situation based upon principles which we define. Now, your point is that can you agree to certain parts of it? And the different communities are at different stages. All I can suggest to you is go look at the Peace Regional District. They're all very, very different. And there were areas, electoral areas there that were so behind in their infrastructure, it was astounding. So they built in a top up for people who are so far behind. The first monies allocated were based on a top up based upon agreed upon infrastructure needs. So they were allowed to redress some of the differences between communities right off the bat before they allocated money. In addition to that is when you look forward, I mean, I say look at the region. Tell me a community that didn't look after its citizens by pursuing a revenue sharing agreement in the Peace Regional District. In my estimation, every single community, whether it's an electoral area or whether it's the regional district itself or each and every one of the municipalities that are involved there, are in a better situation today than they were before they had before they had the fair share agreement. That's how I think we look after our citizens. We negotiate for the differences between us at the outset, but we recognize that this is a very effective vehicle for meeting our citizens' needs and our community's needs at the same time. So I think it's both.
Councillor Thorkelson.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. It certainly is given me a lot of things to think about. But what I'm really intrigued about is when you talk about what is according to what communities are going to get according to their need. Now, if every community had an equal taxation structure and an equal infrastructure deficit, then each according to his need could be addressed by future requirements according to development. So, for example, Prince Rupert is going to be the heaviest impacted community from the local LNG. We will be the service community for the local LNG, and so the demand on our infrastructure would be greater, and therefore I could see for revenue sharing making an argument that we would get a large chunk of revenue sharing of the revenue sharing money in order to grow our infrastructure with the growing of the infrastructure needs. And I can see that being shared throughout the district. And, terraces, if it, remains a shopping center, what does terrace get? And going all the way up to the Hazeltons, looking at the need that is created because of the LNG impacts. Let's just deal with LNG strictly. Let's forget about everything else, okay, for the moment. But what we hear all the time is how much better Terrace is and how much better Kitimat is, right? Like the Kitimat taxation, individual population taxation is next to nothing because of their heavy duty industry, right? And so our population has no heavy duty industry, zip. And so almost the whole taxation burden has fallen on our residents, where it has not fallen on the residents of Kitimat. And as certainly in Terrace, you've got a great commercial taxation base, whereas we have virtually no commercial taxation base, or none, very small compared to Terrace. So what I'm looking at is that we have this revenue sharing idea, each according to his needs, which would be fine if all of the citizens in the Northwest were taxed the same. Our individual taxation was the same, and that was starting off. So what I'm wondering about, I'm trying to run through my mind, is what does it do? Does it give Kitimat citizens build up their revenue, their infrastructure, and they get more money, even though they have a huge industrial base already to tax, and their residential taxes are low, and our residential tax, and we're exactly the opposite. And we've done somewhat of a study on this, because I can tell you we are under huge criticism from the people of Prince Rupert, because our property taxes are so high here. Individual personal property taxes are much higher here. Our utilities taxes are higher here. And there's all sorts of reasons for that, but our biggest one is that we have nobody else to tax except the people who live here. So I'm wondering, how do you? And I'm not asking you for the answer to that, because I understand it's a complicated question, but I'm very intrigued about this idea about the need value. And I understand what you're saying is that we, that a bunch of communities had no infrastructure and they had to rebuild their infrastructure. But I'm not talking about rebuilding infrastructure. I'm talking about what is the present taxation level to maintain the infrastructure, because I imagine in Terrace, I don't know about Kitimat, imagine in Terrace you're probably just maintaining your infrastructure. But if you're maintaining your infrastructure, we're barely maintaining our infrastructure. And but our taxation differences, our taxation is very much different. So how do we deal with that and deal with tariffs and deal with places like other places who aren't supplying any services at all and probably don't want to? For example, Dodge Cove, right? May not want to have roads, may not want to have paved roads, may not want to have a complex sewer system, right? So how do we deal with those?
This was 15 minutes, right? These are remarkably complicated questions. I mean, they're obviously the special domain of economists. But what I can say to you is this: is that Terrace is not in a dissimilar situation. We may have a more of a commerce section, but I mean, we get just as many complaints from homeowners and the business community as well that they're remarkably overtaxed. The district of Kitimat has 40 times the industrial tax base of the city of Terrace, so we know what it feels like to be a poor cousin as well. I can't speak to all the details, but I know that the negotiations they had in the fair share agreement allow for communities which are affluent and receiving substantial amounts of taxation through assessment receive less than communities which are experiencing demands and are getting less in terms of assessment. That was my example in terms of Taylor. Taylor at the beginning, they had so much revenues from industry in its area that it got virtually nothing out of the fair share agreement. But as their industries closed, they increasingly receive more. So built in is an intrinsic recognition that some communities are not going to need as much because they can rely on industrial taxes. So see, it's not only a combination of what we don't have, but it's also a combination of what we do have. They're both calculated in the formula. And the population is how many people are affected. And lastly, in terms of the industrial assessment is what is the magnitude of the development. So I mean, you can come up with a mathematical equation, but I mean, each of those elements, you're right, has to be taken into consideration. And an agreement has to recognize fundamentally the fact that we're not, I mean, who cares if you win a 100-yard dash if Kitimat's starting off at the 90-yard line, right? And you're starting off at the 10 and we're starting off at the 0. The fact of the matter is that Kitimat should get this amount and we should get a heck of a lot more so that we're even. It's a difference between equality and justice. Not everybody needs to be receive the exact same amount in order to achieve a just outcome. And I think what we're aiming here is for a just outcome. So each community benefits based upon an assessment of what it has and what it needs.
Councillor Thorkelson.
Okay, so I understand that. I'm also a big fan of equitability, and I was probably considered a pretty radical socialist in my younger years. Hopefully, I'm still considered that in my older years. But and I understand each according to his need. What my question to you is: are you contemplating that each according to his need means that overall this area over time? Okay, I'm not saying day after tomorrow or as soon as this agreement is signed. I'm saying over time is the goal to equalize taxation, individual taxation, and business and community taxation within the area so it's more equalized. And so at the end result is that Kitimat gets less because because they have a high industrial taxation rate, but Hazelton would get more. And so at one point that the Hazelton taxes or the Prince Rupert taxes on individuals don't have to go up, whereas the taxes in Kitimat have to. So in the end result, everybody's 20 years from now, everybody is paying in our region. We have basically a similar tax regime in every community. Is that how you see this working out?
Mr. Mayor, through you to the councillor, that's a great idea. I like it. But the fact of the matter is, I think that's a remarkably lofty ambition. There's nothing in our goals or aspirations here which talk about a universalization or rationalization of taxation. But what I do see is this, right? If Kitimat is only receiving a certain amount because they have a high rate of industrial taxes currently, and Hazelton's receiving will receive a larger amount in terms of revenue sharing because they have very little industrial taxation, the principle would be that the Hazeltons could then reduce their reliance on the homeowner as they get a higher share of revenue sharing, and there should be a natural movement for them to have lower taxes as well, because they'd be less reliant on individuals and businesses and things. So theoretically, but if a community chose to just take all the money and not do anything with its industrial tax rates, then we'll see you at the polls, right? If other communities are doing it, are sitting there going, we're getting this much from revenue sharing, and don't forget, we're not allowed to make money in municipalities, right? So if you have a community that's receiving an inordinate amount of money and you've lowered tax rates, you're not supposed to continue to get money in addition to that, right? So there should be a lowering, I think, of reliance in terms of homeowners and businesses as more and more revenues become available through revenue sharing. That's the principle. What the governments choose to do with that, I mean, again, we're not going to speak to influencing the autonomy of individual elected local governments. It's a collective negotiation. Each receives their allocation, what they choose to do with it. Me personally, if I had a whole bunch of new revenues coming in, I got to tell you, part of my platform in the upcoming election is to reduce taxes on business and reduce taxes on homeowners as more industrial taxes come online and as this revenue sharing agreement is come in. I think that's defensible. I think any smart politician would embrace the exact same thing. But I can't force somebody to do it, right? Nobody can force somebody to do it. If you want to have high revenues from a revenue sharing agreement and continue to have high taxes, I think you do so at your own folly.
Councillor Kinney.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Bruce, for coming this evening. I appreciate you wanting to work with us, and we would, of course, like to work with you. But we have to worry about our outlying villages and our areas here. It's not just Prince Rupert. We have to work with our First Nations. So there's a lot of talking to be done. And the way I feel, I think it's great, but I'm going to wait and listen to my city manager to guide me on how I really should do it. Thank you.
Councillor Cunningham.
2 points. Councillor Astley brought up the one on or touched on your MOUs. For one of the ones that I read was your resolution to conflict. And it says that if the different boards can't resolve it, it goes to the regional district, Kitimat-Stikine, who we are not represented on. So if they have the final say on any conflict or resolution, is that resolution going to be changed? Have a say on the end there? Because right now it's sort of stacked against us if we come in late and well, we don't like what you want to do, and we'll go to the regional districts to Keene where we have a voice on it.
Don't
I don't.
When this came out, we didn't expect to see such rapid endorsement of the construct and stuff. So clearly, in addition to having a principle that allows for ongoing new membership, the governance structure and the grievance resolution structure have both got to be modified in accordance. I mean, it was regional district of Kitimat-Stikine because we were the first ones off the gate. But now it's no longer. Now it's a combined group of the regional district of Kitimat-Stikine, Skeena, Queen Charlotte, and Bulkley Valley. So they all have to be represented in terms of the governance process and, of course, the grievance process as well, and the grievance resolution process. So your point's well taken. We have not been able to keep up with the number of people who wanted to enroll and subscribe.
Thank you. Councillor Carlick Pearson.
Finally, after everyone, I'll say my little piece. I think it's a really good concept. I don't see any major flaws in it. I think it's a great business concept and model that we could use because the sustainability of it is there and we're safeguarded. We have to work with our other communities, and if we're low and they're high, then we could work off of them and vice versa, which is awesome. And I like what you said about the communication with the outlying communities as well. We develop MOUs to establish those, and regardless if there's going to be any revenue sharing involved there, at least we could utilize resources and communication, which is huge. I'm curious to see how it goes, and I'm going to go and research a little bit more about it, but I really like the business concept. Thanks.
Mr. Mayor, through you to the councillor. One thing I can guarantee to any community, you will be no worse off than you are now. You will not lose one additional, because we're talking about additional new revenues. You retain your ability to tax assessment. That doesn't change, right? So none of the revenues you have now are affected. So you will serve your constituents and you will serve your citizens as well as you're doing now, and hopefully better. No community will be worse off. And like I said, that was the principle we adopted, why people need to be paid first, and there needs to be some equity in terms of how these things are allocated, because our principle is no community will be worse off as a consequence of participating in this. And that I can guarantee, because you'll have the exact same industrial assessment taxation that you have now, right? And any costs that we have as a consequence of this alliance are just distributed across 25 or 26 local governments. So the costs are distributed, but the benefits that will be attained by all of us as well. So what we're talking about is like that cake, right? You sit there and say you need to take care of your people. Well, you have been doing that with the cake, but I'm asking you, do you want the icing as well? Do you want some portion of those additional revenues? We need it in Terrace. There's no two ways about it. The current model, our cake is like this freaking big, right? That's it. In order to serve our people, it's 1/40th of the size of the cake in Kitimat. That's inadequate for us. We need some of these additional revenues to properly serve our citizens. So that's what you can say to your constituents, is you can sit there and say, you know what? We're willing to give this a try because we will be no worse off at the end of the day than we are today. But in fact, we've never tried collective bargaining on this scale before. Nobody has. So we don't know what we can achieve. And so my thought is we might as well shoot for the stars. $3 billion is my goal, because you're sitting there going, that's what we deserve. If you ask me, morally, and based upon our access to resources and the service demands that we have, a 3% share of the overall revenues does not seem inordinate.
Final questions from members of council. Doctor, thank you very much. Andrew, thank you. Mr. Marcellin, thank you.
Thank you
Appreciate so much. You've managed to squeeze 60 minutes out of a 10-minute presentation. And Councillor Thorkelson will have the last word.
Notice how you got so much more for your 10 minutes. Just like revenue sharing.
That's a debatable point that we'll take up at another time. Councillor Thorkelson.
Yeah, I just was wondering how we can follow up this conversation. I'm quite, like I say, I'm quite intrigued. But what I see as this huge industry that may or may not go in here, depending on how prices go. But we have this huge industry going in here, and we have huge deficit problems that nobody else, as serious deficit problems that nobody else faces in the Northwest because nobody else is going to face that type of immediate need that we're going to have. We're going to have an immediate need, and we don't have the money. So, but the idea of sharing, I'd like to have further discussions, and obviously now is not the place to have those kind of discussions, because we need to think about it, we need to talk about it, we need to, I'm wondering, I'm not too happy with the NDI structure, with how that's ended up. I'm not so sure that Prince Rupert is getting, we didn't spend our money to begin with, and I'm not sure we're getting our $2 million that we saved worth of revenue into our community. And so I'm, and I'm not so sure that, I'd have to be convinced that it was to our, at least not to our loss, but to our advantage to have a holding corporation that would hold the money and disperse the money. So those are the kinds of questions that I would really like to get a head around. I owe my allegiance to our community, and I owe my allegiance to our community, and which is thinking short term, but also thinking long term. So I would like to further this discussion without doing any more than I need to think about it.
Councillor, what we'll do here is we'll have Mr. Long and the staff get all the additional information. We were given some more information tonight. Get all that additional relevant information, put it together in a report. The council will have a discussion. If we need to, again, get a hold of Dr. Bidgood and Andrew and Mr. Marcellin, we'll certainly do that. But we'll get the staff to put some information together looking at the advantages and just what's involved. And of course, there's been a very good discussion tonight, so I think the staff have a good idea of the focus, where we could possibly go.
Well, see, I understand that this is. I understand from this discussion that this concept is developing as we move forward, and so I would like to. I would like to also, Your Worship, we need to have our own discussion. The new council that's elected definitely needs to have its own discussion about where it wants to take Prince Rupert in this idea of the alliance. But I was wondering how and who we would have further discussions with, and maybe you don't need to answer that now, but how are we have these discussions with to have some broader, some ideas like you've given us now. I would like to know how you envision to have this concept of money is doled out, and how you have the equity concept. Those kinds of things are very interesting to me, because I see that maybe might not help us in the short term, but it might very well help us in the long term. I'd like to see that, and I'd like to be convinced. I'd like to give you a further chance to convince me of that and the other councillors of that.
So what we want to know is your political fortunes.
Mr. Mayor, I mean, if I'm still around in November, I was just thinking about it's a really good statement. Most of the communities, I'll say right off the bat, have sat there and said they like the idea and they want to pass a motion to join in a meeting. I can understand if you have reservations, you have some abilities, you want to think those things through. It would, in my mind, seem advisable for a group like this, particularly on the eve of an election, to approve something like this in principle. And I think that really where a lot of the questions you're going to get answered are not going to come through me. Who are you kidding? I don't know all the details. But the CAO's working group, the advisory group, they're looking at staffing and how to organize and addressing some of those questions. I mean, if the council here was so inclined and would be willing to at least agree in principle to investigate the concept, we would certainly entertain having your CAO attend our working group meetings. And by virtue of that, that could be a vehicle for the flow of information back to your council. Because a lot of the questions you're asking are technical questions regarding funds and revenues. And I mean, it's not the special domain of an elected official to know those things.
Certainly. Thank you. Mr. Long, have you got a comment on this?
Yeah, I probably have a lot of comments, but I think that at the moment, I think we really need to look at what is being presented here. I'm happy to present a report to council. There are a lot of issues. There were a lot of things talked about on Northeast in the Fair Share Agreement, and the circumstance there are completely and utterly different than the circumstance we find here on the coast. So the analogies that are being used here, I think, need to be looked at pretty carefully. The assessment in this particular circumstance is not in the outlying regional districts. It's actually within the boundaries of some of the municipalities. So it's a completely different circumstance. But I'd be pleased to produce a report for council that would lay out the pros and cons for our particular circumstance. Happy to do that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's getting late for yourselves. I know you got an hour and a half drive. Do appreciate you coming down here.
I'll be back tomorrow.
I see. Well, enjoy your night in town.
No, we're going back.
You are going back. Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much to all three of you.
We're only that easy.
Mr. Long, do you want a motion from council, or are you satisfied with the direction? Okay, thank you. We'll move down to bylaws. Tonight there's a report from the chief. Yes, Councillor Thorkelson.
Your Worship, I think when we were thinking about this before, and I'm not sure if we actually made a motion, but what I would like to make sure included in this is a discussion with some of the communities in in the Peace River area, in that North Rockies agreement, and also in the Columbia River Trust area to find out what they think about the pros and cons of those agreements and what the different, and then in that analysis what the differences are between those agreements. I mean, I know that's a big burden for staff, but this is a hell of a lot of money we're talking about. So, I mean, I think we need a thorough report, and I think we need some investigation about how those other communities how those other communities feel about it, so that we know not and be in order to carry on.
There's not only that, Councillor, there's also the Fraser River Basin Agreement, which wasn't mentioned here, but of course does include coastal communities.
Right, and so I just think that we should have a look at those various agreements, and I'm certainly not opposed to the concept of collective action, but we have to make sure that collective action benefits ourselves. I mean, I think we're all thinking about that in the short term and in the long term, and we won't know until we talk to these other communities about how they feel about how it worked out for them. And I'm very cognizant about what Mr. Long is saying, is that regional districts in the Peace River had the revenue and the communities didn't have the revenue, and it may be somewhat different here. What does that mean? Certainly I can see the purpose of trying to have some kind of sharing arrangement so that we don't have a bunch of poor sisters and a bunch of rich sisters. I agree with that concept as well. But I think that we need to have a good thorough look at it, not just be carried forward in the feelings of euphoria. We need to, I think, have a hard look at this and not just have solidarity as the reason for doing something. We need to have good, solid understanding if we're going to do something like this.
Certainly, we'll ask the staff to include that. Mr. Long, if you'd include that analysis in your agreement. I don't want to put too fine a point on it, Councillor, but when you talk about sharing, it's got to be equitable. It's got to go both ways. Thank you. We'll move on then. Under bylaws, there's a report from the Chief Financial Officer. This concerns the 2014 5-year financial plan amendment bylaw. It's number 3355,2014. The recommendation is that Council adopt the 2014 5-year financial plan amendment bylaw. The number and year I've just stated. Mrs. Bombin, would you, for the people that are watching at home and those in the gallery, would you outline the text of the bylaw should Council follow the recommendation, which is to adopt it?
Thank you, Your Worship. Each year, the City of Prince Rupert must prepare a 5-year financial plan. Since Council adopted the 2014 5-year financial plan bylaw on April 22nd, 2014, the following changes have occurred. The landfill airspace is being consumed faster than was anticipated. Council passed a resolution to perform additional site development. The retaining wall on 17th Street was priced higher than originally expected. Council passed a resolution to fund the wall from contributed surplus. The Zamboni was purchased by another organization and leased to the city. The fire truck was ordered but won't be delivered until 2015. The grant from NDIT will be received and spent in 2015. The PILT received from the Prince Rupert Port Authority was less than budgeted. However, the Prince Rupert Port Authority made an interim payment for previous year's PILT. The Fraser Street project was postponed until 2015, and the airport busing costs have increased. The community charter enables municipal governments to make expenditures that were not contemplated in the financial plan, provided that the expenditure is brought to the attention of City Council. The 5-year financial plan is amended so that the expenditure is included in the 5-year financial plan. The 2014 5-year financial plan amendment bylaw has incorporated all of the above noted changes.
Thank you. Councillor Thorkelson.
I was wondering if staff could explain what happened with the PILT arrangement, to give us a small and concise but very explanatory statement about how the PILT arrangement went, and we went to court, or not to court, but we went to arbitration, and how that worked out and what happened.
Mr. Long, has that been finalized, or will it be the subject of a press release?
We did actually issue a press release um, Friday before last, I think it was. You will have all received a copy. Maybe I'll, try to be concise and straightforward. Basically, the city of Prince Rupert disputed the issue of assessed values, which is really the issue that the port and Prince Rupert were in dispute over, which was the value of properties which hadn't been leased to third parties that were still owned by the Port Corporation itself. And that those values were in dispute from 2007 through to today, through a long process of going in front of the dispute advisory panel, which is a federal panel which deals with disputes on PILTs. We reached a positive conclusion for the city's point of view around the first assessed values that the port had established, and the dispute advisory panel indicated that the basis of which the port had used to determine the assessments was incorrect. And so rather than our suggestion, which was just take the BC Assessment Authority's values, the port chose to go out and get an additional assessment, which they did. We then sat down, and rather than continued on with the DAP process, which is both long, painful, and expensive, we decided to negotiate a settlement for 2007 to 2012. And so we did that, arrived at a negotiated settlement. We, contrary to some of the things that I've read, we did not agree with the assessed values of the Port Authority. And they did not agree with the BC assessment valuations, and so we agreed on a negotiated settlement. We agreed also on a bit of a process which we'll go through for the years of 2013, 14, and subsequently 15, where we have a lot more conversation between the BC Assessment Authority and the port themselves, so that they understand how the BC Assessment Authority determines valuation. Hoping that we can arrive at the use of those numbers to be an effective way to determine the PELT. And so that's where we sit at the moment. They did agree then. We did agree on a settlement agreement. I'll leave it to each party to explain what they thought the results were. I think we got a good settlement. We got substantially more than they had proposed, but not as much as we would have received if it was BC assessment valuation. And we look forward to the new process, hopefully minimize the amount of conflict in the values moving forward in 2013, 14, and 15. Hopefully that was succinct enough.
Councillor Thorkelson.
Sorry, could you speak a little bit more about the new process going forward?
Sure. The neither party has sort of given up their rights, individual rights. Ours to go in front of a DAP, again another DAP hearing, and theirs to determine what their assessed values are by way of an independent appraisal. But we had hoped that having a conversation, because we've relied on BC assessment authorities valuations, which is the valuations that everyone in the community actually pays their taxes based on, and that process, we thought that having a better and more thorough communication between the port and the assessment authority may help the port understand why the values are what they are with the BC Assessment Authority. We have the ability to appeal the BC Assessment Authority's valuations if we don't like them, and they do too. I think that's probably a much more practical solution to all of this. Whether or not they'll accept that, I guess is remains to be seen. But we see at least, I think, a lot closer to making sure the communication piece is flowing freely. There were pieces of information that BC Assessment Authority didn't obtain from the port in their determination of values, which they thought would help them determine the values of the port's assessed values, and we just think that having a better communication piece will probably help us all. If we have to go in front of DAP again, then we'll we'll have to do that if we're not happy with the assessments and the subsequent PILTs that the port will put forward. But as you can see by the 5-year our plan, our financial plan, you can see that we still haven't received what we budgeted for in terms of what we expected to receive from PILT in 2014. So that puts us behind the 8 ball in terms of our revenues. So that's a bit disappointing, but we hope that in the subsequent process that we can solve that. We get much closer to what, and we bill the Port Authority based on BC assessment valuation. And so we sent them a bill, and they then submit based on what they think the number should be. And at the moment, they haven't submitted based on BC assessment authorities for 2013, 14, and subsequently 15. So that's the process we hope to get to. I would like to avoid another DAP process, and so I'm encouraging the port to really work with the BC Assessment Authority to get the right assessed value so that they can pay based on that basis.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Councillor Ashley and then Councillor Cunningham.
So I'm just clarifying. So we still haven't, well, 2013, 2014, they're still being negotiated as well as future. Have we received any portion of the monies from 2013? I know that you said 2014 we've only received part. Have we received the money for 2013?
Yeah, we did receive a portion of what we billed for, but not all of it.
Sorry, do we know how much that if the amount that we budgeted according to what we thought we should get for 2013, 2014, a ballpark figure of what we still are missing from our budgeted accounts?
Yes, we do know that number. Yeah, I believe it was 500 and something. We're short on what we had actually budgeted for. Remember, we had that conversation at budget time and said, look, we're going to budget. This is a revenue as if we will receive all of the 100% of the assessed value, but we haven't received it. I mean, it's still a process to determine what they will ultimately pay, but 2014, sorry.
The amount is over $500,000 there. Going forward, of course, as there is more port development, the values will increase. And not that it's a way to catch up, but at some point we'll get there. Councillor Cunningham.
Well, the assessments will increase, but at the same time they decrease. So who knows where the equalization will be. But question I had is, at what percentage are we at now that we're missing from what they think is BC assessment's value and we are? Because I'd love to be able to take that off my BC assessment next year.
For 2014, I believe that they've paid approximately 70%.
There's no further discussion. I'll ask for council's consideration of the recommendation, which is to adopt the said bylaw. Moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Ashley. Any further discussion, or I'll call for the question? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That bylaw is adopted. Under additional items, I'll just mention 2 things that I'll suggest to the council they consider. One is with regard to the recent marine emergency response. We all know that the tugboat Barbara Foss, which looks after the Aquatrain barge here, had to come to Prince Rupert and drop the barge off and respond to the emergency. And from a community standpoint, residents are concerned about any possible loss of life at sea. And while this happens outside of local government boundaries, it affects families and communities. Pursuit of the emergency marine response needs, I believe, to have a regional focus. It's more than one community can do to draw attention to the increasing need with the anticipated increase in marine shipping activity. As it is a regional issue, I suggest the City Council may ask the Skeena Queen Charlotte Regional District to prepare a brief that can be used to lobby the Government of Canada. They could, through a larger number of community leaders, ask for supportive information from the Prince Rupert Port Authority, the Chamber of Shipping of British Columbia, the Pacific Pilotage Authority, the British Columbia Coast Pilots, and Port Metro Vancouver. So I'd ask Council to think about this in light of this most recent incident off of Haida Gwaii, and that is specifically to think about whether or not you want to ask the regional district to take this on and prepare a brief that we could all get behind as a greater group to express the concern. Councillor Ashley.
So just as a piece of information, at the regional district meeting on Friday, it was certainly, one of the top concerns, and we got a brief on the emergency response plan. And one of the actions that the regional district took was to be writing a letter asking for more emergency response. So as a follow-up to that, certainly we can put forward that it would be a good idea for us to collect some more information to go along with that, and then also forward that letter asking for support from all of the region. Because I think, this is just something that, considering the amount of industrial development that's happening in our area, the increased amount of ship traffic, regardless of what it's carrying, these are things that we're not equipped for, and they keep on cutting everything back. So I think it's a very good idea.
Well, concerning, I see this certainly going beyond writing a letter. In fact, I see loss of life as the worst thing that can ever happen. And so with support from these various marine entities within the shipping community and the support from the communities in the regional district and the port here, as well as Port Metro Vancouver, I mean, certainly attention needs to be brought to the fact that Hecate Straits are some of the most ferocious waters in the world. And of course, they ran into an incident on the west coast of the Charlottes in the general area, which was very severe to the point where it was injuring crew that were trying to hold on and protect themselves within the vessel. Yes.
Just further to that, then, if I would certainly, like Councillor Kinney and myself can certainly bring that to the regional district. Perhaps if we could ask you to share the detail, the people that you thought we should be contacting and the types of information that should be in that brief, that would be appreciated.
Certainly, and I think the best way to do it is if you go down there and talk to the regional district about it. If the board is of like minds, which it sounds like they are, they could have the administrator there call Mr. Long, and I'll make sure Mr. Long has the background information.
Okay, we will do that.
So we'll get the staff working on it. Thank you. Councillor Garon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think the Canadian Coast Guard needs to be included in that as well as I believe that we should be asking for some kind of presence over on the Queen Charlotte Islands, where there should be a base for search and rescue on the west coast of the Charlottes. I have no idea how many ships are transporting each day. I'm sure they're doing the North Pacific route. I'd be curious to find out what those numbers are. You can track them on an AIS or ILS, whatever it is, online. There's a tremendous amount of traffic. It's going to increase tremendously if we get any more activity here. And I think the Navy, the Coast Guard, and search and rescue need to have a presence on the Queen Charlotte Islands. So,
well, that may come about as a result of this combined lobbying effort. And of course, the reason you want to talk to these other groups is all of these ships, when they're sailing through Canadian waters, have a pilot on there. The reason I didn't include the Coast Guard is it's when you're asking the federal government to do something through the Coast Guard, it's very hard to include the Coast Guard to lobby against themselves, in effect. But certainly there's other people in the marine industry that can provide us valuable information.
I'm asking that the federal government provide more of a Coast Guard presence on the west coast of the Charlottes. We shouldn't have to wait for the Americans to come down.
Well, certainly that would be the objective of the report once we get background information.
I guess I'm being just a little bit too progressive.
Well, you're asking for a large expenditure from the federal government, and of course, when you're asking for that sort of thing, you need to back it up with the appropriate information.
Well, if there was a disaster over there, it would have been a pretty large disaster. So I think we need to take some large measures. So I'm not willing to just walk lightly on this. I think that we really need to put a push on it.
The intention is not to walk lightly, it's to get the support of others so we have a larger, stronger voice.
I think others will support it. No problem whatsoever.
Thank you. Councillor Thorkelson.
Oh, I'd like to move that City Council ask the Queen Charlotte Regional District, Skeena Queen Charlotte Regional District, to put together a report and including a report including a position regarding Coast Guard rescue capabilities off of Haida Gwaii, and that it include trying to make alliances with those organizations that His Worship read out earlier, which is, I don't want to bother repeating all of them. But I think that it was a good idea that His Worship came up with, but I think that we should expand it to include what Councillor Guerin was talking about, was, you know, increased Coast Guard capabilities on the on Haida Gwaii so that it can respond to the boats go in, you know, up through Dixon Entrance, through Hecate Straits, or down through Queen Charlotte Strait and up, and Haida Gwaii is right in the middle of all of that, which, you know, and we have really very limited ability to respond, as we saw. So I think that would be good to get a report including all of that.
Certainly, I think the report would have a lot greater impact than just writing a letter.
Yeah. So
is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Kinney. Does everybody understand the motion?
the poor secretary, but I think, Your Worship, you mostly had it written down, didn't you?
I did. Thank you. Is there any discussion on it? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. Motion's adopted. The other thing that's come up continually, the council's hearing the call for assisted housing in one form or another, and the demand may continue for a number of years. And local governments outside of Vancouver do not directly get involved in the building of housing. They do, however, facilitate and help enable various forms of housing to be built. And as an example, they may support a cooperative housing society and lobby for land at a nominal cost, as well as get support from the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation to get housing built in the community. And this was done in the past with regard to the apartment and townhouse complex on Drake Crescent. In other places, the local government will work with community service groups and the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation so that those groups co-sponsor seniors retirement housing. Habitat for Humanity is another organization that supports these sorts of projects. So I'm going to suggest to the council what I've said is a positive way to proceed over the concerns about housing, and that is to go out and ask groups if they're interested, whether they're community groups or other groups that involve themselves in housing, as a way of garnering some support and then working with them to go talk to the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. Councillor Cunningham.
We were approached by, I believe, Reverend Jason Hagerton to sit down with that group. And I believe there's other groups in town like CAP, the Salvation Army, that would love to sit down in those discussions. And those are groups that we should reach out to and maybe form some sort of committee, because they're on the grassroots bottom line. They know what's going on. They've got a pulse on everything. And I really think if we're going to look at any type of housing, social assisted or anything, that those are the groups we should be working with, as well as some government agencies. But I think they can really help us, and they're going to be able to, like, you're a favorite for having statistics, and you know there's statistics flying around, but sometimes I wonder how true they are. These people know exactly how many people are living on the street, exactly how many people are coming into assisted living and social housing at Raffles and places like this. And I think they'd be great partners in something like this to put together something for housing.
Now, the value of statistics sometimes is not, it doesn't present itself in the right light, and perhaps some of the problem is the way that statistics are gathered. For instance, as you know, the province is very quick to point out that with regard to assisted housing in the city of Prince Rupert, there's a 2% vacancy rate. Yet when you talk to people, it doesn't appear that that is really so. But there is value in involving the community groups. What I was hoping to do first was get some interest from groups that have perhaps some money to put in to start the process off, and then bring the other groups in who understand the need and then can provide information from their perspective in support. But please go ahead.
Okay, well, where the city can help is this P1 and P2, land that we cannot generate any revenue from. We could have city staff look at some of that land for building some assisted or social housing on, and then from that, we could get a nonprofit organization to manage it, bring in a developer to develop it, and then the nonprofit organization runs it, and the only money that would be generated from that would be going right back in to pay the mortgage and also for maintenance. So I think the city could be a great partner and stuff like that, because we do have a lot of land that we cannot sell and we cannot do anything to generate any revenue from, and the P1 and P2 stuff. And there's sections or lots sitting around the town that are big enough to put 15, 20 condos on.
Certainly there is a raw land survey coming from staff as part of the community development plan. Could certainly start looking at that. Councillor Ashley.
So I think both you and Councillor Cunningham have some really good ideas. I guess where I see this is we had that report from Mr. Krekic about social housing, affordable housing strategies, housing commissions, and I think that probably maybe a starting point of who should be on a housing commission would be some of the things that you're talking about, is those kinds of organizations. I think, and I could be wrong about this, but I think staff is starting to look at who would be part of that housing commission. But I certainly think that they're all great ideas. The more creative we can be, the better. The last thing we want to do, as much as I know it's something we need to take care of and be aware of, but we want to be creative so that we don't take on the burden of having to try and finance these things out of our budget, because we know how much stuff we have to finance already. So the more creative we can be, as both of you have suggested, I think the better off we are.
Thank you. Under reports, questions, inquiries from members of council, Councillor Kenny, and then Councillor Ashley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have two things. First, I'd like to thank Mrs. Hermanson for inviting us to the anti-poverty luncheon last week, and it was very, very good, very informative, and I got a lot out of it, and I'm sure the rest did too. But I just wanted to send a special thank you for all the work they're doing. And the other thing is our recycling station, which is just open, is an absolute mess. And I've had nothing but phone calls on it. And I'm going to ask Councillor Ashley and to help me bring this up at the regional district at the next meeting so we can get this straightened out.
Perhaps they need to dump those bins more often, or in fact get larger bins. There's been quite a lot of usage there.
I think what they really have to do is close those bins during the day when they're open, because people are not wanting to go in. They can see that they just dump it in there instead of going in, and that's just overflowing the bins.
Or dump the bins more often while
Yes.
they're there. Councillor Thorkelson.
Well, I had was a request, and I was reading the provincial government's backgrounder on liquor and the liquor sales and what can have liquor sales out of grocery stores now, and they've got a bunch of rules. One of the good things is they're not going to be out of corner stores. And I was wondering if it's probably not as important, certainly, as the housing report, and not as important about as the on my priority list anyway, as the report regarding taxation of LNG facilities. But I really would like to know what, if any, of the local grocery stores are deciding to, if we're going to see, if we're going to see an expansion of liquor sales in Prince Rupert, or availability of liquor sales in Prince Rupert.
It's only stores larger than 10,000 square feet.
Yes, and I'm not sure if any of ours are larger than 10,000 square feet. I have
Right.
no idea how large 10,000
I believe
square feet.
Safeway would be and Overweighty would be.
Yeah, so I thought
Yeah.
they probably would be large enough, and so I was wondering if anybody knows if they're going to engage in how they do
Mr.
it.
Long, have you heard anything? No. Councillor Cunningham?
It says in that report, and they're going to include the government liquor stores now, that they cannot build or go into a liquor store within a grocery store, and it says they have to have 75% dry goods, if I remember, sales, 10,000 square feet.
Yeah,
But they
95%, Councillor.
but they cannot build within 1 kilometer of an existing beer and wine store, and provincial government, according to their own regulations, have said now they're including government liquor stores as that. So that means both stores would be ineligible, because the Belmont Beer and Wine store, everything's within 1 kilometer, and everything's within 1 kilometer of Safeway. It's just something we have to look at and be careful about, because I'd rather see our small beer and wine stores and our liquor stores stay open, rather than have the big chains not hire anyone else and displace 15, 20 people out of their jobs.
Well, if it is as you say with that criteria, it's not going to happen. Right. Councillor Thorkelson.
Yeah, I've read the same thing as just not as clear to me as it is to Councillor Cunningham, and I hope he's correct. But it says the 5-kilometer rule will be removed to allow for the relocations of licenses throughout the province, which means that right now there's a rule that says you have to relocate. If you're going to relocate a license, it has to be done within 5 kilometers, which is the reason that a license from the Crest, for example, I think was moved down to, I think it was from the Crest or from somewhere anyway, uptown, was moved down to
over at Maverick Mart.
Maverick Mart. And so that was within that rule. And now they're going to take a license that could be in Vancouver and reallocate it somewhere else in town. Now, if that means that they can reallocate it to a Safeway because it's already an existing license, that would be interesting. So I'm not sure which rule takes precedence over the other rule. That's all I was sort of wondering.
Councillor Ashley, then Councillor Garon.
I just wanted to take a brief moment to congratulate, I guess, and thank the Salmonberry Trading Company. They put on the Harvest Festival on Thanksgiving weekend, and it was a great success. I wasn't there last year, but I was asked to come this year. I believe, and I'm probably going to miss a couple people, but Donna McNeil Clark, Joe Scott, 2 of the organizers. And there was like some great arts and crafts, local food, singing, music. It was great. And it was their 2nd annual event, so hopefully will continue happening, because it was a really awesome community event.
Thank you. Councillor Garon and then Councillor Cunningham.
I don't think I had my hand up, but I'm just dittos to Councillor Kinney on the recycling center. I'm, going back on the guru of the garbage thing, where I think garbage and recycling, landfill, and the recycling should all be under one umbrella. I just think it goes hand in hand. I think the recycling drop-off needs to be re-looked at. And also,
enlarged or enlarge the bins, or what do you suggest?
I just think the whole process it's not going to work. There's too much wind and rain that you can't keep that cardboard dry. It's on a busy traffic area. It's too small. I would have envisioned large 40-yard containers, that kind of a thing, more of a sheltered area. I think that we should lobby the regional district to keep the recycling center open longer. And also, I would like to see the landfill open longer as well, because I think that's why we have a dumping problem around town. You go out to the dump, it's closed. You get there 15 minutes too late, it's too closed. People are dumping all over the place. We're still having to go and clean it up. So it's just been a bug in my ear for a long time. And I really think that if it was all under either the city or the regional district, that because they go hand in hand, we could keep more out of the landfill and possibly make more money with the recycling center. But I'm just going to leave it as a conversation for now, because
For the
hopefully-
2015 budget.
you bet.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ashley.
So just, I totally get what Councillor Garon is saying. And certainly like from the regional district perspective, I mean, it's our service, or we're the main contributors to that service. So we can change, we have the power to change whatever we want there. The issue comes down to cost.
Certainly.
And so if we want to increase the hours, it's going to increase the cost. So I think it's a good conversation to have. I mean, we've already kind of had some conversations about, do we want to divert some stuff out of the landfill to try and increase the lifespan and get more recycling? You've brought that up a lot of times. So I think they're all really good ideas. And I think that is a conversation that should continue to happen. With regards to the 24-hour recycling, I've had similar calls. I know that there's concerns. I guess the way I would look at it, and it's concerns we'll bring forward, obviously, to the regional district. There was, because of cutting back of hours, because of trying to save costs, there was a request to have the 24-hour transfer station. So it's in place. Obviously, there were things that were not considered when they put those in there. And part of that is, again, cost concerns, right? So I think that the thing is that if people put forward what the concerns are, then the regional district will try and deal with them as they can. We've heard a lot of those now. And so, I mean, let's remember it just kind of opened. We got to try and figure it out. So if they weren't big enough bins, then maybe we need to look at bigger bins. If there needs to be some sort of and I agree, it probably shouldn't just be fencing. There should be some sort of wall there. Then we need to look at that. So, but I think that we need to kind of give them a chance to work out the bugs. It's just started.
Certainly, it was a trial and error process, first initial break-in and modification. Councillor Thurkelson.
I tend to agree with Councillor Garon. I think the conversation that we should have is between the recycling. Somehow we have to have this conversation between our landfill and between recycling. And I'm not sure how we do that. I'm not too, I haven't thought of the consequences of putting the landfill under the regional district, or taking recycling and putting it under the city, talking to the regional district about that. But certainly we need to coordinate it. When it was interesting to me, maybe not to anybody else, but I stayed at my brother's in Pitt Meadows for 6 weeks. And there, every other week, you have to figure out if it's a recycling week or a garbage bag week. And they're allowed one garbage bag every 2 weeks, one garbage can every 2 weeks. And the other week is recycling, and they have curbside pickup, right? And they also have composting. So my brother composts his own because his wife has a garden. But other than that, you can give your composting there too. So there's virtually nothing that goes in his garbage can. And so of course, if we were doing something like that, one garbage bag every other 2 weeks, because everything else goes into recycling, we'd have a huge mountain of recycling, which I don't know if we could handle. I don't know. That's what the regional district would have to tell us. But we'd certainly have less in our landfill. So our landfill costs would go down. We'd have to create fewer cells and cap fewer cells. But then what are we putting into our landfill? Because now we're reducing the amount of things that can biodegrade easily, right? And so we're going to have more, we could have more pollutants in our landfill, which might be even worse. So like there's the kinds of things you need somebody to actually help us walk through. But I do think it's a conversation that we need to have.
Well, certainly, Councillor, depending on the amount of development that we see here in 2015 and going through onto 2016, 2017, perhaps sometime next year, this local government along with the district of Port Edward, the regional district, and even perhaps some of the surrounding hamlets, as well as the Aboriginal communities, may start having a conversation about the regionalization of a variety of services, whether it's recycling, whether it's a landfill, whether it's public transit, policing, fire rescue. The other consideration between ourselves and the District of Port Edward could be water supplies. We all know that at some point the federal government's going to impose upon municipal governments sewage treatment plants. Together we'd have to look at something there. We've talked a little bit about a regionalization of the airport. So there could be a variety of topics which predicated on the amount of development we could get that will come into discussion there. Councillor Cunningham.
At UBCM, we had discussed with Minister of Environment about incineration, and they were going to send information to us. Have we received that yet?
As far as I know, we haven't, Mr. Long. No, we haven't got it yet.
Okay.
Generally, when you make a request there, it takes sometimes anywhere between 30 and 45 days to get a response. Councillor Garon.
In speaking to that, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, we had young Sean Carlson in front of us who gave a presentation on garbage incineration, and I know he traveled over to Europe as well to look at things. So, we do have someone in our own backyard that's been looking into that, and I'm sure there's been a lot of advances on that in the last 3 years. So you might want to consider speaking with him.
Is there anything further? If not, I'll quickly give the mayor's report. I attended the launch event of the new British Columbia Liquefied Natural Gas Alliance here in the Northwest region. There are 5 natural gas entities interested in building export projects in British Columbia that are members of the alliance, and Councillor Garon was also in attendance. The Prince Rupert Airport Authority has announced that for the period January 1st to September 30th, 2014, compared to the same time last year, the number of airline passengers has increased by 7.98%. I attended the Pacific Northwest Liquefied Natural Gas Project update information session about the proposed export terminal on Lilu Island. Councillor Kinney was also in attendance. I attended the Community Living Day event held by the Prince Rupert Self-Advocacy Group to raise awareness in the community for their members and their activities. I attended a forum entitled An Examination of Liquefied Natural Gas Shipping Safety, which covered the following topics: properties and safe handling of LNG, LNG vessel construction and operations, safe handling of LNG carriers, safety and design and operation of Pacific Northwest LNG terminal project, and development in LNG bunkering. The forum was hosted by the Chamber of Shipping of British Columbia. If the LNG industry does locate in this area, it could possibly bring an additional opportunity here with regards to the fueling of various ships that are being built or are being converted to use LNG as their primary source of fuel. I attended a luncheon with members of the Kayan Anti-Poverty Society to hear about the need for assisted housing and give them an update on Council's discussions at the 2014 UBCM last month with the Minister of Housing. Councillor Cunningham and Councillor Kinney were also in attendance. I attended the Prince Rupert Camera Club exhibit of photographs at the Museum of Northern British Columbia Art Gallery. The showing is dedicated to the memory of the late Peter Finnegan, who was a longtime member of the Prince Rupert Camera Club. I received a telephone call from a representative of Campotex who advised that they have signed a lease with the Prince Rupert Port Authority for their planned potash export terminal on Ridley Island. I believe the signing of the lease was predicated on getting the appropriate permits and approvals. The last item I have is regarding the upcoming municipal election. And there are some advanced polling dates from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and they are on Wednesday, November 5th, 2014, Friday, November 7th, 2014, and Wednesday, November 12th, 2014. Also at the Prince Rupert Regional Hospital from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Thursday, November 13th, 2014, and the Prince Rupert Regional Hospital 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. There'll be a bed-to-bed poll to allow the patients there to vote, and also at Acropolis Manor at the same afternoon from 2:30 to 5 p.m. And once again, that's on Thursday, November the 13th, 2014. That concludes my report. If there's nothing further, there is, please go ahead, Councillor
I just wanted
Ashley.
to make just a quick comment.
Yeah.
When you said that, it just kind of brought something to mind. I believe that during the last election, the voting rate in Prince Rupert was, I think, was it 35%, something along those lines. So I just wanted to kind of put the message out there, regardless of who people are voting for, I'd like to see us improve that turnout ratio, because I think we can do better. I mean, people, I think if you care about the community and stuff, you should get out there and vote. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. That number in Prince Rupert's actually higher than a lot of other communities in British Columbia. Councillor Thorkelson.
Well, on that, CBC issued a challenge this morning. They said that they were instituting a challenge between Prince Rupert and Prince George. So CBC has taken up that challenge. So I expect that CBC every day is going to have reasons, 20 reasons about why you should vote in Prince Rupert and 20 reasons why you should vote. So I challenge CBC to have those 20 reasons, right? What I was going to say, Your Worship, I forgot, but you reminded me when you talked about your attending the LNG thing. There's going to be an LNG meeting also sponsored by CBC. Maybe this is one of their 20 reasons you should get out and vote. It's going to be sponsored. It's sponsored by CBC. It'll be on Wednesday at the library from 7 to 9. And Dr. Barb Fageter, who the city has employed to do a study on LNG, is going to be part of the panel, as will Jen Rice, as will Herb Pond, and I can't remember who else is on the panel. Maybe somebody else remembers. But it's going to be have people who are knowledgeable about the LNG situation, and they're going to answer questions as best they can at some kind of a panel. I really don't know what the setup is, but it's at the library on Wednesday from 7 till 9.
I wonder if the multi-purpose room is actually large enough.
Well, they might have, it might be going outdoors.
Right. Councillor Cunningham.
Councillor Ashley, Councillor Cunningham, and Carlick Pearson got a recreational committee meeting that Wednesday, and I don't know if we can postpone it, because I think we would rather go to the LNG, although the commission is very important also, so we'll try and do a juggling act.
Perhaps the recreation committee meeting could start a half an hour early, or rec commission meeting, pardon me. Start a half an hour early, and perhaps you can get the majority of the business done and get off to this other meeting. I'll ask council for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Garon, seconded by Councillor Ashley. Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. This meeting stands adjourned.